Thank you for our panelists for joining, and also thank you everyone to the audience for sticking around. Panel number 4 will be focused on can Bitcoin rollups recreate the core value propositions of smart contract chains and absorb the functionality of competing L1s. And we'll also explore some of the trade-offs that are involved. So starting off, I'd like for each of our panelists to give a brief introduction of yourselves and your roles at your respective projects. You want to start off, Carter?
Sure. So I'm Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Psi Protocol. We're building a new smart contracts proof of work blockchain. We send our proofs over to Bitcoin and Dogecoin. So yeah, we're trying to bring more utility to the proof of work space. And part of that is, verifying computations on Bitcoin.
My name is Gabe. I'm leading BD at Citrea. Been doing that for 3 months now. Previously, I was at Galaxy doing Bitcoin research. And yeah.
Hi, I'm Yago. I've been trying to work to bring a greater programmability and scalability to Bitcoin for close to 14 years now. Over the last 4 years, I've been working on trying to achieve this through zk. And a year ago at the Bitcoin conference, at the time it was held in Nashville, we verified zk on Bitcoin in block 853.626 for the first time. And now over the last few months, we've been rolling out the ability to port BTC to other chains and the ability to issue programmable tokens on Bitcoin.
I'm Boaz. I'm with StarkWare. We're in L2 over Ethereum and are going to be in L2 over Bitcoin, hopefully in the near future.
Okay, great. And I wanted to start off this conversation today with just a discussion on the current trade-offs that are present in rollups. So in scaling Bitcoin with these Bitcoin native rollups, what core trade-offs are present that must be resolved to make them competitive with, say, Ethereum-based rollups, whether it be within user experience, scalability, general programmability? What should our priorities be over there?
All of the above.
So I think one big difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin is that Ethereum is designed to be able to handle data blobs and data. And so if you want to have true Bitcoin level security, with the current design, if we just mimic what is being done on Ethereum, you end up with rollups which are far too expensive to actually run for almost any practical purpose. Now, there might be people who disagree with me. I already mentioned that Citrea.
I wrote that report, by the way, so I'm fully aware.
I'm not sure. Awesome. So
do we not all agree that it's going to be Validiums on Bitcoin, and this makes the most sense that we should put the DA somewhere else?
So I don't think so. I think that there are other models that can be built, but we have to separate ourselves. We can't just ape or mimic what is being done on Ethereum.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, frankly, there are definitely ways, for instance, one that comes to the top of mind, right? If you want to store a 20-byte address and the new balance, like 4 megabytes actually is quite a lot of space, as long as you can do introspection. But currently, like the really only fully trustless way that you can do things is like kind of an atomic swaps based paradigm where you run a light client. Some of the stuff that we do on Dogecoin and Bitcoin on Solana, we run all Bitcoin consensus inside of a Solana program, and you can introspect the Bitcoin blockchain and do atomic swaps like that. So if you have liquidity providers, like you can kind of get because at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that what we really want is like a trustless Bitcoin bridge, because with zkPs we have proof of math, so we don't really have to worry about Bitcoin security, right? Yeah, so you can kind of get a little bit of that with atomic swaps, but then with other if we want to actually do like arbitrary peg-ins and peg-outs. So we did like a zkP verification over a toy curve, and then if you couple that with a light client, you can kind of allow for like trustless peg and peg outs. Again, the toy curve is probably not secure, but yeah, like you can kind of do trustless peg and peg outs. Like right now where we're sitting, we definitely can't do partial peg and peg outs, right? And yeah, so like all the other options are just bit VM. Is there any Is there anything else that like makes sense right now? Do you guys think?
Well, all the rollups are doing BitVM bridges, right? I think it's the real question is like the trade-off assumptions between sidechains and rollups, right? What is it, multi-sig, honest majority setup or a BitVM bridge setup? Those are the trust assumptions, like the differences in trust assumptions, right? You kind of hit on that point. I think another one too is obviously like the DA, right? Like where is the data being stored? If you're posting data on Celestia, for example, like, are you a Bitcoin rollup? I think that's up for interpretation. In my opinion, you're not. I think you're just a Celestia rollup using Bridge Bitcoin. But yeah, I think that's like another consideration when you're thinking about the different trade-offs and trust assumptions.
Well, I mean, certainly, like, there's a fundamental difference between being a proof of stake chain where like transaction validity is guaranteed by proof of stake, versus if like data availability is guaranteed by some like other non-proof of work, non-proof of math consensus mechanism. Because like, the sort of if you have economic based security, and the only damaging thing that you could do is censorship, which is essentially what you could do with like a sort of malicious DA. It's a lot easier to model those kinds of threats than if you have validity at stake, because people could steal your money, right? If you have a cabal of people that could take your money away, right? Like, if they're not going to get slashed by less than that, then they should do it. That would be the MEV way of doing things, right? So if you have to worry about those things, but I don't know that. I think Bitcoin validiums are what we want, right? Would we be happy with Bitcoin validiums, or do we want like?
I think it depends sort of what you're trying to achieve. I think one of the big challenges with BTC is that people who hold BTC are many of them, most of them, are holding BTC because they want to reduce their counterparty risk or third-party risk as much as possible. And so one of the challenges with this entire space is, sure, we now have better bridging, right? And we have bridging where you can effectively reduce your trust assumption to 1 of n, and maybe you can even be one of those n. And so for you, it is effectively trustless. But then what are you doing? Well, you're probably putting it into some kind of application like a smart contract. And now you've got a whole new set of problems, because there's the developers who have built out the smart contract. There's possibly people who have the ability to upgrade it. And then there's the state that it needs to run on something. And so it's needing to run on some kind of chain. And so I think the more you can grind down the points where you have like these additional aspects of trust, the more you'll be able to bring BTC into utilization, right? So one example right now is validiums, but there's other potential paths you can take. So one interesting example is a oft forgotten but extremely innovative chain, which was called Mina, right? Which effectively created a constant product zk proof of its last state as a recursive proof. You could imagine having that entire thing embedded. And one of the interesting things about Mina is it's effectively memoryless, right? And so that sort of removes entirely the question of the DA that we've.
But I mean, Mina is basically just a validium bit. Like, if you want to use it, you have to bring your own DA.
Yes, right. So I mean,
it's kind of like a topology.
You have to have. You don't need DA of the entire chain in order to utilize it.
Sure, but like, just I guess the reason why DA is important is because if you don't have access to your data, you can't prove this. Right. Like, if I don't, let's say maybe I need to have some Merkle proof in order to spend my coins. Like, if I don't have access to that data, then I can't use my money. So like, and by the way, I love Mina, and like a lot of what inspired Psi and like what we do with like client-side proving and like, like parallel block proving was like came from Mina. So we love the Mina guys, but it's like, I don't think like having a constant size blockchain like solves the DA problem that we're talking.
No, it removes the DA problem, right? So the DA problem is a construct of the current roll-up idea.
But Mina just allows users to roll their own DA, right? Is the kind of the idea. I just
wonder, like, I don't want us to get too far into the weeds on this one particular subject, but yeah. So maybe back to you.
Yeah. Next question.
Yeah, sounds good. So it sounds like there's quite a few different considerations that we need to think about. I mean, you mentioned that we shouldn't completely mimic Ethereum, and then there's the other design considerations like with DA that we'll all have to think about. So I'm very curious to hear about all of your thoughts on just this idea of zkRollups just becoming obsolete. So what would this obsoleteness look like for other L1s if, say, zkRollups mature on Bitcoin? Could they draw liquidity as well as like developer mindshare away from these L1s? Or is there still a need for, depending on the use case, for these other L1s? What do you guys think about on just this topic of potentially, if zkRollups on Bitcoin were to mature, would this make other chains obsolete?
I think the entire concept of L2s is starting to get a bit murky with time because, and excuse me for bringing it as an example, but Starknet is now an L2 on Ethereum, but it's going to be an L2 on Bitcoin as well. So once it's an L2 on both of them, what's basically the concept of an L2 anymore, right? Then it could be an L2 on Solana. And so is it a bridge? Is it like, what is it exactly at that point? So I'm not sure if it's going to be obsolete or if we're going to see the rise of like single application chains that are going to be interconnected. But I am pretty convinced that we're going to see a lot of rise in interoperability between all of the different chains. And then, yeah, it might grind down the concept of an L2. I'm just not really sure what you mean when you say obsolete. Does the win make the Venetian obsolete?
Users that care about their security a lot will probably use zkRollups on Bitcoin if they want the most, and people who don't care will probably still use other chains, right? Like different strokes for different folks, right?
I think it's not. So I think there's like this fantasy. We can call it like a Bitcoin maxi fantasy that if Bitcoin were able to provide you with the full set of functionality and features and scalability and everything that everything else is using, then we wouldn't need anything besides Bitcoin. But there's a reason that that's a fantasy. And the reason that that's a fantasy is because we're, even in the conversation that we're having and any conversation that maximalists have or anyone, there's always an assumption that a lot of activity is happening, which perhaps settles to Bitcoin, but it needs to happen somewhere else. And so I think the fact that Bitcoin can do more now allows it to express its very, very dominant lead in the form of network effects. And so we're going to see Bitcoin not only be dominant in the form of the asset BTC, but become more dominant as a general purpose ledger, as a general purpose settlement mechanism. But that also creates opportunity, right? So you can think of Bitcoin almost as a ledger, and then other chains have the opportunity to act as sort of like state and execution environments for applications that can work very, very closely, almost trustlessly with that ledger. And so I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for Bitcoin to do far more than ever before. And as a result, for the rest of the crypto ecosystem to also play a more important role.
That was good. I think the Bitcoin fantasy thing you hit on is something that needs to be talked about more, and like not everything is gonna come on Bitcoin, right? Like that's stupid to think, right? But I think in a world where Bitcoin zkRollups achieve everything they want to achieve, you know, I think there's still going to be zkRollups on Ethereum. I mean, the reality is like the Ethereum community has a lot of users that are quite loyal, and I think it's hard to say that like, oh, you know, in a world where Bitcoin zkRollups have the best tech and all that, like we automatically win all the crypto users. I think that's a false narrative, because I think one thing I see from a BD perspective and also from a research perspective in my previous role is that the best tech doesn't win. I think that's something I continuously remind myself. So yeah, even if in Bitcoin we do have the best tech, right? I mean, we have a ton of talent building on Bitcoin. I mean, you look at Citrea, you look at Alpin, right? I think it's pretty clear that like there is talent there. But despite even building the most obsolete rollups, right, best tech doesn't win, and I think we've seen that in Ethereum. With zk Sync, I'm not calling you out, but StarkWare, like one of the most talented teams I've ever seen, right?
Thank you.
But despite that, like people really only care about arbitrum and optimism in the ETH world in terms of like activity and all that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but we're not deleting zkRollups on other chains if we win, right?
I mean, we also have 10-minute blocks, right? Which kind of, there's certain applications where,
Yeah, the UX is just insane. Yeah, again, it's if I try to like look at other things in the world that behave similarly, so it's just like banking infrastructure. So you have the Swift and you have the banking system on it, and then you have the application level, and not everybody needs to know that the Swift exists, and obviously most people shouldn't ever interact with it. So that's how I look at things. It's a good metaphor, I think, for like Bitcoin and the L2s and other banking systems and other like Ethereum. Again, Bitcoin doesn't have to be the everything for everyone all the time. And like my colleagues here said, I think it's crazy to think that that's going to be the case, even if we have the best tech and whatever. I think also that, like you said, best tech doesn't always win. I feel like we're very focused on the tech, and probably should be as focused on the user experience and the novelty and the day-to-day life of people. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there in Bitcoin, not necessarily in Ethereum. Ethereum, not as much as with Bitcoin. I feel like if people are going to live with crypto, it's probably going to come from Bitcoin, not necessarily from Ethereum, although it has a much better UX and a more like developed community around the L2s and the applications, Arbitrum, OP, whatever, all of these guys. Yeah.
Build things people want. Like it's like build applications people want. It's that simple, right? Give a good user experience. I mean, not to talk about another product, but like just look at Hyperliquid, right? A completely centralized chain. Everyone knows it, but it's a good experience, good liquidity, good pricing. Like people are going to use it. People needed that, right? Like we do forget that a lot. It's like people building really super technical things. It's like, you ever talk to your users, right? Like what they actually want. You ever talk to like, the average crypto user that is very interested, right? Like those conversations are a lot different than talking with like our colleagues,
I agree. It's somewhat of an echo chamber, and we're very focused on tech because we're all builders in this space. But like my dream is to build applications that are on crypto that nobody knows that they're using crypto. I look at the focus tree that just launched on our chain, onboarded 200K users in a month, and I don't think any one of them knows that they're on chain.
That's the best combo.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just like you said, give people what they want, and the tech is there like to be seen but not to be heard type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like there's always trade-offs and different caveats to be considered, like you mentioned, 10-minute blocks, and then also even on the user experience side, which you mentioned a lot of, Boaz. And yeah, I really appreciate you for bringing up those points, and also you, Gabe, for mentioning about we really need to focus on just on the user's perspective, how to make things as seamless as possible, and they shouldn't even have to worry about what's happening, the underlying infrastructure. Their process should be as simplified as possible. So really appreciate those points being made on the user experience side. But just curious to hear also, just because we were speaking about depending on the type of application, depending on the use case that, say, a protocol or some project is building, perhaps they find it more suitable to use zkRollup on Bitcoin versus some other kind of ecosystem. In what scenarios or in what use cases would it be like more advantageous, or if there's any kind of advice or strategies they should use in evaluating whether to build on Bitcoin-based rollups or say on other ecosystems, depending on the type of use case or application they're trying to build.
I mean, I think it's a really, there's an ocean of opportunity in Bitcoin right now. Entirely new avenues of what is possible have really just are in the process of the flower is blossoming as we speak. Whereas if you look at sort of the broader crypto space, it's more and more competition competing over effectively the same audience. It's we've sort of saturated the design space of Ponzi and speculation and gambling within the crypto space. So I think just on that first pass, without knowing anything about the technicals, there's a blue ocean opportunity in Bitcoin now that exists nowhere else in crypto. Beyond that, the impact of that is that Bitcoin, despite everything, has managed to maintain an absolute commanding lead in terms of its asset base and its network effect. And it is now being adopted by large financial institutions, by governments, by sovereign wealth funds, as well as by individuals. And so, broadly speaking, whenever you're in a network effect driven industry, and I think few things are more network effects driven than global financial systems and settlement and money, you always should bet on network effects, and it's going to be winner takes most. And I think for those two reasons, the safest bet if you're trying to build anything real is Bitcoin.
I mean, certainly any applications where you're going to be trading Bitcoin, or Bitcoin as an asset is important, and you want to have that trustless peg, and you don't want to rely on something like a wrapped BTC, would make sense. But yeah, like I really also like what you were saying about the network effects, because there is kind of a branding aspect to all of this, right? Where it's like being Bitcoin aligned is certainly beneficial when you're trying to make inroads with perhaps a crowd that isn't used to using decentralized applications. And I think it is sort of to be seen whether or not these folks want to use dApps, but I think they will. Because if you have the Bitcoin values, then one would imagine that ethos would carry over into wanting to decentralize the rest of the internet and sort of expand the trustlessness of Bitcoin and the reasons why most people buy Bitcoin to the rest of their digital lives.
So not that zk enables this use case or makes it better, but I think the one clear thing for all Bitcoin L2s, right, is Bitcoin back lending, right? Like BTC is collateral, borrowing cash. I think that's probably the largest market to attack and to win over. I mean, I think as of last time I checked, there's probably about like $8 billion worth of wrapped Bitcoin on Aave uses collateral to borrow stables. And why should that be on Ethereum? I think like all of that, or realistically, at least 80 to 90% of that should be on Bitcoin, right? So I think although the borrow lending space does not primarily like significantly benefit from zk tech, I think it's something that we're focusing on. And we understand, I think, from building a new chain, right? There's plenty of players involved, but the player that does win the lending game is going to probably take it all, in my opinion. I mean, you see all this, you can see all these integrations right now with the more centralized versions, but like Coinbase and Morpho, I think Strike, right? They have Bitcoin back lending. I think that's a huge market that we're trying to go after, and I think we're not the only ones too, but not zk enabled, but just wanted to throw that there.
I agree that probably weapons grade collateralized assets, that's the way to go. But what you said about thinking that the ideals of Bitcoin will bleed over to the users and they're going to want to have decentralized apps, I'm kind of wary of that. I'm not actually sure. I think we're putting too much on the users. I think that we're expecting them to be like financial experts in order to be able to do all of these, like borrow and then lend and then put something in a pool and then stake it and then get liquid staking and then lock that in some, all of these games. It's a bit too much to expect users. I don't think any of us probably do that in our personal life with our traditional finance. So I'm kind of weary. I think that we're putting too much expectation on the users, and I think that last time I looked, I think it was 1.2% of Bitcoin was wrapped, which is people that want to, like, obviously want to participate. The rest, I just don't know about them, and I'm assuming that the vast majority of these people, they're not going to want to do anything too fancy. Just want to get like low risk yield on their Bitcoin and hold it as an asset. And if we can enable that in like a simple self-custodial way, even the self-custodial part, which for me is crazy if people don't want, but I keep reminding myself that I'm not the user. So maybe they don't care about it. I spoke to a few big institutionals, and I told them, okay, would you like to have obviously you'd like to have a self-custodial bridge, a trustless bridge. And most of them told me they don't want a trustless bridge. They want a trustworthy bridge. They want a bridge that is trusted, but they know who is running the bridge. They would rather have like a bridge by Citibank, someone you can sue if the money went away, which was like very shocking for me as a revelation. But they hold a lot of Bitcoin, and they're not looking for trustlessness necessarily. So that's my 2 cents on the matter.
And I mean, Bitcoin lending is like is already a big thing. You know, most mining pools provide it as like a sort of an upsell kind of service. There's large institutions that are doing this with paper contracts. But like you know, you were saying with some of the complex steps that lead to eventual yield on your Bitcoins. Frankly, this can be made into a single button where it's done in the background. But if your point is on the user education side, like really explaining what's going on, yeah, I think. But you know, frankly, a lot of the financial transactions that we do, you know, if I buy a stock, right, there's a lot of steps that go into a stock actually being traded, if it even is. So I think like there's you know, we can abstract that away and give a better UX, but yeah, a point taken about the lending stuff.
Yeah, but you're completely right, but we currently don't. We need to develop like this layer of like financial experts that they do this, they sell this, they distribute this to the clients. Just like you call up your broker, you tell them buy a stock. You don't connect to the server farm in Jersey with your computer and try to start sending UDP commands. But we're at that phase. We're expecting them to connect to the server farm in Jersey or something close to that at this point. So yeah, I'd try and build things that abstract away everything and simplify it.
I don't know if I buy any of this. If any of this was true, Bitcoin would have failed, right? So if you had come to any one of these people that you're talking about 14 years ago or 2 years ago and said to them, look, I'm going to issue a commodity money. It's going to be secured by a global lottery. And it's going to consume large amounts of electricity because that's how you participate in the lottery. And it's got no value outside of what the market provides for it. And we call it Bitcoin. Literally, no one would be interested in it. And I know because, you know, a lot of us were here 14 years ago and 12 years ago and 10 years ago. And they said, no, I don't want this. I want dollars. I want T-bills. I want, you know. And what we're seeing now is the degradation and the loss of faith in financial institutions, Citibank included. So yes, you know, it's true that you need to talk to customers, but you have to also try and envision what are the actual benefits of the from first principles. What are the first principle benefits of the new systems that we're building, and the ability to eradicate counterparty risk, the ability to not have to wait for a judge in Delaware to rule on your case, but you know, to know that your funds are encrypted and secured by you know, mathematical principles, has proven to be a $2 trillion industry and is likely to turn into a $10 trillion industry.
Eventually. I agree. Eventually. I
Yeah,
think that in
If we
order
didn't
to
agree, we
get
wouldn't
there,
be here. Yeah.
yeah, I think that eventually, but in order to get there, we need to survive all the way there. Listen, from what I've heard, Michael Saylor isn't putting his Bitcoin on chain, right? Isn't like doing DeFi, isn't using,
yeah,
and probably
Not
would
even
not
proof
use
of reserves.
but what
right?
system would
would
he use?
probably not use a trustless bridge right now. If one existed right now, would probably not use it, not put all of his money on it. This is too complex, too new. In 5 years and after several $billion were successfully bridged in and out, maybe, but not today.
I think there's a reason why. I'm pretty sure the fact is 60% of Bitcoin supply hasn't moved on chain in like 3 years. That's like the hodl wave on Glassnode. It's a great Bitcoin on chain data site. Like that alone just shows you like all the shit we're doing is like not for the majority. Like there is a sizable amount of users that just like
I don't know.
won't touch
That
this.
that 60%.
And that's okay.
That 60% includes my Bitcoin.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. And I haven't moved it, not because I don't believe in decentralization or not because I don't want to put my Bitcoin to work, but because I haven't been satisfied with the security assumptions and assurances that I've been getting from what we've had up until now.
Definitely. Well, we're like the more modern hodlers though. Like, you know, what about, because people kind of forget like the big bag holders are really just like regular cypherpunk people that live in the mountains. You know, they liked Bitcoin in 2010 or whatever, accumulated a good bag, and like that's it. They're fine with it. And like, sure, like they don't need to use any of this stuff. Like, but I get what you're saying. I don't really use my Bitcoin. Like the only time I'm really on chain is like what ordinals, all that stuff. Like I'm not taking loans out right now. So I agree with what you're saying. We're in that 60%.
It seems like the wrapped BTC statistic is sort of what we would imagine the like TAM, at least at this present state, without like further validation. What we would be
Initial
looking at.
serviceable market.
Right.
Yeah.
Because like we can definitely make a compelling case that some of these like constructions that we're building are more secure than, you know, like the wrapped BTC kind of, you know, multi-sig situation. But to your point, like some people may prefer a bunch of institutions that they could potentially sue. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And just another question about, or like the last question before we close today's session. I'm very curious to hear about all of your thoughts on how the narrative of Bitcoin will shift. Even though we talked about, well, 60%, we're part of that 60% statistic. Most of the Bitcoin that we hold is probably not on chain. But say that as applications mature, we're seeing more DeFi-based applications. We're seeing, like, for example, we talked about the Bitcoin-based lending use case. As we're seeing more of these applications emerge, will Bitcoin's narrative shift from its original digital gold store of value kind of system into something else? How do you see the overall narrative changing as these applications mature?
I think it will shift for sure. I think the digital gold, I mean, we can thank the ETFs for this, for good or for worse, but like that is right now like one of the biggest, you know, like forms of onboarding right now for Bitcoin, right? And you know, I think the learning curve is going to be steep, but for the initial foreseeable future, we'll call it, you know, 1, 2, 3 years. Yeah, you know, it's going to be the digital gold narrative is kind of going to be like the main thing, and you can also borrow against this digital gold. I think that's when you talk to, you know, a TradFi person or, you know, a mid-level crypto person, like the borrow lending story is like really easy to understand. I think once you get into things like Babylon and all that, it gets a little like, all right, like, what are you talking about, right? So it like what we're doing is going to take time to mature for sure, and I do believe that the broader, you know, supporters and holders of Bitcoin will catch on to like Bitcoin being more of a dynamic asset than just digital gold. But yeah, it's not going to be overnight, you know, like it's going to take time. It's and you can tell when you talk to some people at this at the main conference. It's funny, like we have a booth and these, you know, random people come by and stuff, and like you start telling them that you can do things with Bitcoin, and like you just see the gears start turning. So that's kind of like a reference point that I like to use as well. So
So, digital gold wasn't the original narrative. It was P2P cash. And it's changed many, many times and will continue to change based on what proves to be useful. If you think about what is Bitcoin actually really good at, Bitcoin is the world's best ledger. It's cross-border, it's highly secure, and now it's trusted by basically everyone. So I suspect that the next big thing is going to be being able to record your ownership, your property rights, record assets with the same security as Bitcoin. And so I actually suspect that the next use case is kind of boring from an application perspective, although will require applications for the purposes of issuance, for the purposes of sort of modulating and qualifying who can utilize assets. But I think we're going to see more particularly high value assets. And we've started to see, we saw a little bit of this with ordinals. We saw a little bit of this with BRC20, although those were sort of almost like proof of concept in terms of the technology. But I think Bitcoin as the world's ledger is likely to prove to be an increasingly important narrative going forward.
I mean, I tend to agree. I would definitely hesitate in saying that that Bitcoin as digital gold, that narrative is going to change. Frankly, for what we are, the applications on Bitcoin people, we are certainly in the minority. And as far as like the media goes and the mainstream perceptions, I do think that's kind of a losing battle. But I don't think that's necessary for people to associate Bitcoin with applications. Like, I think probably more likely is that we've all heard the term military grade security, right? This can be applied to applications that have absolutely nothing to do with weapons or battles, right? I think Bitcoin grade security or secured by Bitcoin for something like a Bitcoin OS or a Citrea or a StarkWare or Psi. I think this probably is more like a branding, or at least like a better business bureau kind of a seal for folks, rather than like people associating Bitcoin itself with applications. Because like frankly, there's some things with data availability. Maybe we could do the full rollups, but these things are taking place outside of the Bitcoin VM, and I don't think it's necessary that we attribute things to Bitcoin that perhaps a large portion of the community doesn't want us to attribute to it. We can have it both ways.
Absolutely. Any more thoughts, Boaz?
So I'm not seeing the digital gold narrative going away necessarily. Probably maybe morphing a bit to something a bit more mature, like a premier asset class. I think basically Bitcoin is the premier asset class today in the world. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing like a more Wall Street type of branding to it. But again, it's basically pretty much the same narrative. I like the ledger narrative. I'm just not sure it's going to be as it's a bit harder to explain than digital gold.
Yeah.
And I think for the everyday person, so digital gold maybe premier asset class, like more of a professional sounding, like but that's it. That's what I see in the coming couple of years, and later on, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like this digital gold narrative won't disappear, at least not overnight. So we'll continue to see it becoming prevalent, and it does for a lot of kind of just the common person out there make the most sense from what I'm hearing. But we'll also perhaps see some narratives like with the ledger narrative that you mentioned, or even the premier asset class narrative. So definitely all up to interpretation, and yeah, we'll see. So thank you so much for all of our panelists for joining today's panel. Really appreciate all the insights. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.